Hey, everybody. Welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
And we're here today with another guest. Very excited to have this person on. We reached out a while ago because we became aware of him through another podcast that Zach and I are both fans of. Our guest today is Casey Pegram, who is the supervising podcast producer at iHeartMedia. He's the producer of Stuff You Missed in History Class, Dress, The History of Fashion, and an upcoming show called Svetlana, which is a docu-podcast about Joseph Stalin's daughter. I'd like to ask him a little more about that.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. This is very, very flattering. You record these podcasts and they go out into the ether.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you don't hear anything back. So I'm glad that you guys were, fans of it and into it, and very, very just humbled to be asked on. It's really cool.
Wow. Thank you, Casey. We're very excited to have you. The topic we just wanted to talk about, Casey, with is Radiohead's music and members of the band. And let's be honest, we're talking about one member of the band when we say that. But in film, on screens both large and small. And the reason we reached out to Casey about this is not only because he has a background in filmmaking and photography. He's made several short films, music videos, as well as a completed feature called Annie in the City. You were the cinematographer on that, Casey?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, directed by my friend Paul Deckant.
And you know what? We might as well just say now, is there a way that listeners can see that if they want to?
That is a good question. It was on, you could watch it on Amazon for a while. It eventually, I think, got taken down. And this is a terrible lapse in self-promotion. I'm actually not sure if you can watch it online at this current moment. I'd have to check with Paul.
Taken down? Whose feathers did you ruffle over at Amazon?
Amazon did this weird purge where I guess they looked at metrics for viewership. And of course, we were not a big movie. We didn't have any marketing or anything, but we would just get these random reviews of people who found the movie one way or the other. So it was, for a while, it was cool to have it on that platform. People would stumble across it. And they Amazon, like maybe a year or two ago, just kind of like purged anything that was below a certain threshold of viewership. And we got caught in that. So.
No, well, I don't care for that at all. They're like,
it's pretty lame.
Oh, not many people have seen this yet, and so now we're going to ensure that they never do. that seems weak. Things fine to following.
Yeah, what's it costing Amazon to keep our little movie up on their servers? They're doing pretty good over there.
I think they're doing well. Yeah, this is just another way that Amazon is screwing over the little man, right? Yeah. But so Casey, as I referenced earlier, Zach and I reached out to you, became aware of you because we're big fans of the podcast Movie Crush.
Yep.
Hosted by Chuck Bryant. And we heard you on a series that podcast did about the films of Stanley Kubrick. And when we listened to that and we're kind of talking about guests for the show and people who might, kind of share our interest profile, we're like, there's no way somebody who likes Stanley Kubrick this much is not listening to their Radiohead. It's just, It's just a given, right? And we were correct about that assumption.
Yeah, you nailed it. That you could not have found probably a better fit for being both a huge Kubrick fan and a huge Radiohead fan. So well done.
Yeah, and those basically, if you listen to this show, you know that those are basically the two reference points that Zach and I have on this podcast. But before we get into kind of the band and your background connection with them, I know Zach might have a question or comment just about your love of Stanley Kubrick in general.
Well, I mean, I was mentioning it before we were recording, but I've listened to that series, Casey on Kubrick, I believe is the title of it. Listeners, go check it out. Well, hopefully we can link it in the notes, or at least one or two episodes. But yeah, I've listened to it many, many times. And, I had seen The Shining in 2001 at various points prior to that. But it was kind of cool because I was recovering from a shoulder surgery I'd done. So I had, 2 months off of paid leave, and right around when those episodes came out. And so having listened to, your episode on The Shining and then on Barry Lyndon and Eyes Wide Shut, I just dove in full throttle and really became just incredibly, obsessed with his filmography. I've read quite a few books about, how his movies are made and all that. And obviously I could spend, an entire episode just on that. But
Sure.
I recall this really amazing anecdote you talk about, I think in the Shining episode, of you kind of realizing that The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey were made by the same person. And what's so cool is it's a really like tactile story that I can relate to. And frankly, I wonder if kids nowadays are going to experience anything remotely similar without a physical artifact representing the movie itself. But regardless, I have like memories adjacent to that. Not identical at all, and it's such a amazing story in Kubrick context. But I was just curious if you had anything similar in the form of memories or season in life similar to that, just pertaining to film overall, like a season or a moment when you realized that you liked film maybe more than most kids your own age.
Yeah, I would say DVD was like a huge thing for me. I feel like a lot of people my age, DVDs were the moment where like a casual enjoyment of film became like a pretty obsessive one, just because like the early 2000s were just a very, very interesting time in having access to stuff that was like out of reach just a few years before, unless you wanted to get really, really deep into bootleg VHSs and that kind of thing. But there was so much stuff that was coming out with like commentary tracks and remastered video and sound, and there was such a big online community around DVD collecting that I don't know, I just like slipped into that very, very easily. And I remember like getting like a region free DVD player where I could order titles from like around the world. So like movies that were not available in the United States, I could like order the version from France or Italy or whatever. And it was like a hobby, but it was also like a pretty serious pursuit in terms of like filling in these gaps in certain directors' filmographies and just having like this big online community conversation. Every time like a new title would be announced, there'd be like a thread about it and people would be speculating, like, do you think they're going to use this transfer, that transfer? Do you think this lab did the restoration? Sometimes they screw it up. And there's just like such like fervor and like anticipation over these things. And I feel like that energy dissipated a little bit when like streaming came into the picture. And now it's this weird thing where sort of like everything is kind of quasi available, but it doesn't feel like it has the same weight as when there's like the physical media aspect to it, the collector aspect to it. And of course you have the weird stuff too, where things will be available one day and then gone the next. So there's like this kind of like annoying ephemerality to it all. And this kind of fake conversation that happens where people start talking about something because it just hit streaming. And now like everybody can watch it, but like a month before nobody had like heard of it. Whereas I feel like in the DVD era, I don't know, there was people had like a little bit more holistic view of the history of cinema, I feel like. And like I said, we would be seeking out titles from all corners of the globe. There'd be some tiny distributor in Denmark that like put out this thing that like nobody else had put out. And so, yeah, I mean, that whole era really, really sent me pretty deep. Of course, I was a big fan of the Criterion Collection, all the sort of like behind the scenes documentaries and commentary tracks that were very like unapologetically academic and scholarly. It wasn't just the director being like, oh yeah, I remember when we shot that, and that's like all they ever talk about. Because some commentary tracks are pretty rough going, but when it's done right, it can be super informative. It can be like worth a whole semester in a kind of middle of the road film course. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, absolutely.
definitely that era of like collecting physical media. And when I look at because I have a catalog of like titles that I've bought, and I can look and see when I acquired them, and I can look at like the past year, and I bought maybe 15 titles the whole year. And maybe 6 of those were like in one box set, So like the speed of things being released and the speed of me acquiring them has slowed down greatly, because I used to have years where I might approach like 100 titles. And I think my collection is up near over a couple thousand, I want to say at this point.
Man.
And I love it. I still love having them, people that are like native streamers now, they're like, just throw your physical media away, just stream it, it's fine, it's all out there. But it really isn't. There's so much stuff that's fallen through the cracks. And I feel like maybe in a few years' time, like there's going to be this rediscovery of physical DVDs, Blu-rays, that kind of thing. A bit like there was the discovery of vinyl, because stuff just, it's there one day and then it's not on streaming. So anyway,
man, you said just so many interesting things, but yeah, I and you kind of covered it right there. But I guess to both of you, do you anticipate physical media being something like vinyl? And I mean, I think that it kind of is, but you mentioned a region-free DVD or Blu-ray player, which I got in 2021 when I got the Criterion Collection of Stanley Kubrick. And nice. Even though I think that it comes with, you could play, each movie has 2 discs, but yeah, and it's really cool because interestingly enough, like one of his movies, actually the version that played over in England actually had stuff cut out of The Shining.
That's right. Yeah.
But still, it's great to have, and I've expanded my collection a little bit, and I think it's easy to feel a little bit old and go, oh, kind of kids these days, because maybe folks who, grew up in the 60s and 70s when they would have to, go to the theater and that was it. Maybe they resented in the 80s when VHS players started to, come like, oh, it's so easy and there's no effort. Who knows? It's always easy to. But I do think that like there could be a renaissance in the way of vinyl. And Walker, I don't know if you want to add anything onto that. But
I mean, I really share the ethic of what you're saying. I'm a little skeptical that there's going to be a big resurgence of people collecting physical copies of movies, but I have a great deal of like kind of stream related anxiety because I don't really buy anything. I buy a lot of music on vinyl, but I don't really buy movies except for when I have it in my head that I want to see something that isn't available on streaming, and then it becomes incredibly important that I see it. And the 2 recent examples I have of that are the Peck and Paw movie Straw Dogs.
Oh yeah.
I could never find on streaming, and it wasn't even that I like had to see that movie that bad. It was just, well, it's not available on streaming. I'm finally gonna just buy it. And then more recently, I just saw Heavenly Creatures, Peter Jackson's movie.
Yeah.
With Melanie Linsky and Kate Winslet, both their first movie, actually. And that was, I've been checking for like the last 4 years if it was on streaming. And so I finally bought a $5 DVD from Korea and got to watch it. But I don't know. I really love physical media. I really miss going to the video store. But I just wonder if the time and effort is something that a new generation is going to put into that. But I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, the next thing you got to do is you got to want to watch The Abyss, because that's not available to stream anywhere. And side note, that's my favorite James Cameron movie. But yeah, the other thing you mentioned was commentary, and I think that is I don't know, maybe YouTube you could get some of the director's commentary, but I think that is really hard to come by, like in a streaming platform. So yeah, it might be a smaller renaissance. Hopefully manufacturers don't stop, but
much of that stuff is like already out of print.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like, I mean, I have stuff here. I probably have no idea that it's out of print, that it's actually worth like a few $100. Sometimes you'll be shocked by that kind of thing. The only streaming service I know that does the commentaries really is the Criterion Channel, and of course that's a very narrow band of movies. Like it's all the stuff that they distribute, it's all the stuff that they kind of put out, and they have like their particular approach to cinema and everything, which is great, but it doesn't cover like 90% of the ground of cinema overall is outside of that kind of rarefied art house thing. So a lot of the stuff is just like it's rare, and it's going to get more and more rare, I feel like. And I also don't know if people are actually going to be seeking out the physical artifact, if there's going to be some other way that stuff eventually becomes available, if it makes sense economically. I mean, so much of the time it's about like copyrights and rights expiring, and they revert back to this one, and this one doesn't want to put it out now. And so there's just, it's really weird. Like for a long time in that DVD Blu-ray era, it felt like we're just going to have access to all the great cinema of the world and all the top quality and so on for like in perpetuity. But now it's sort of like this weird window that happened, and it's closing. And the same way that like, films used to like play in theaters, and then they would just literally like trash the film. It would just, there would be no preservation. There would be no like keeping it. It would just like vanish, you know. There are films by like great directors from the early 20th century that are lost now. It's hard to imagine that like there could be like a Murnau movie that just like nobody can see anymore or something like that. So I worry in some ways that the same thing could happen on a smaller scale in the digital realm. And I mean, gosh, even streaming shows, like there's a lot of great content that's never been on physical media,
right?
That has only existed as streaming and then has disappeared from streaming. So the only place you could go is like on torrents or whatever to try to find it. So I mean, there's going to be stuff from this era that also like gets lost, or if not lost, like the only copy is going to be like a 480p YouTube upload that's like, you know, just a facsimile of like the real thing. So it's really weird. I mean, it's fascinating in a way to consider that as far as we've come, we're still kind of like in this precarious position with the history of cinema.
Yeah, Casey, it's time to start selling bootleg DVDs of Annie in the City out of the trunk of your car.
Yeah, you know, I like that idea.
Yeah, you got to do the like Master P thing where you're just like literally driving around the neighborhood.
I love that idea. Like hang out at the airport and like just approach people like, hey man, I got a feature here. Like,
yeah, hey,
$5, you know.
Hey, what's up, homie? You like art house cinema? And holding a DVD.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is silly, but I did want to backtrack slightly to you were talking about, you know, kind of eating up all this supplemental material that was available in the DVD era and these academic commentary tracks. This is decidedly non-academic, but have you heard the commentary track on the movie Armageddon? Is that the one with the
Oh, I know. I don't know if I've actually heard the whole thing all the way through. It's Ben Affleck, right?
Yeah,
talking about
Ben Affleck still
in his or something.
Yeah. Ben Affleck when he's still in his drinking bag a little bit, and he's just talking about how the movie makes no fucking sense on the commentary.
I love that, and I feel there was like a window of time where that sort of stuff would happen a lot on commentaries. And then I feel like after a while they got a little bit more corporate and buttoned up, and like studios wouldn't necessarily put them out. If somebody was like clearly on something or whatever. There's an anecdote about Bret Easton Ellis doing commentary on, I think, The Rules of Attraction.
Okay.
Where that release had like 5 different commentary tracks. It's really interesting. Like they just crammed him in, and he was supposed to do one, and he ended up like oversleeping. He had like partied hard the night before. He came into the studio and he just like, he either didn't say anything or the stuff he said didn't make any sense, or was just like way too whatever. For whatever reason, it was just like unreleasable. You know, they deemed it to be unreleasable. And so then they randomly got Carrot Top to do a commentary. Somebody who I don't think he'd ever seen the movie. He didn't have anything to do with the movie. And my favorite part of it is where James Vanderbeek is like making a phone call, and Carrot Top goes, dial down the middle, because he had done like the
CALLATT.
Yeah. It's just like, I love stuff like that. We're just like these weird mashups of, you know, people that don't have anything to do with each other, and that a studio would still put that out and stand behind it on a DVD is just, you know, I love stuff like that. I hope there can be something like that in the future too. I mean, technologically speaking, there's no reason that a movie couldn't have like 100 commentary tracks now on streaming.
And also to get Carrot Top, famously the most visual performer. He's just like on a DVD commentary describing the props he's holding.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know what the mechanism was for him to get asked to do that and then actually accept and then go do it, and it's so funny just to consider how did that happen.
I'm guessing cocaine may have been a factor involved.
Certainly there was a lot of that involved. Yeah.
No, I remember I think you may have mentioned this on one of your appearances on Movie Crush, but Steven Soderbergh's commentary for Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which I did listen to.
Yeah,
and I'm a big fan of that movie, and they're talking. I forget who kind of wanders into the room. Yeah, and they talk about
somebody else, or did like, because I mean it's the two of them that are kind of doing it from the start.
I think that is it. Yes, but they're talking about hearing Kubrick's voice for the first time because right. When that movie came out versus when they did the commentary, and it's a magical moment. And what's so cool about it is, you know, I'm not a filmmaker. I have a appreciation for it. I couldn't imagine being somebody at like Soderbergh's caliber and the way they talk about that kind of magic moment of hearing his voice for the first time. is
the
just,
reverence where they're just like, oh my God. I think they call it like it's like hearing the voice of God, because
yes,
like
they do.
you know that he was such a an elusive figure in terms of like, you know, especially pre-internet, pre-whatever, deliberately so, of course. Like you couldn't find tape of that guy talking. Like you just, you know.
Well, there was that. It's on YouTube now. I'm not sure if you've ever listened to it. But it's around the release of Full Metal Jacket. There's like a 2-hour interview with him that's audio only. That I think you really, you know, he was already in that elusive period, and I don't want to derail us too much, but he was already in that elusive period, as you know, in that point, but maybe a little less so compared to leading into Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah. And it's really cool because he has his Bronx accent like fully on display. You know, it's this expat, you know, who's one of seemingly the smartest people to ever helm the, you know. But you know, just unabashed, and it's really cool. And he does not come off pompous to me. He doesn't come off like willfully obtuse. And maybe I'm romanticizing it, but I've always really enjoyed that as well.
No, if he was doing an interview, like he really gave it his all. I don't think I've ever read an interview of his or watched one where he was like phoning it in or being hostile. Even if he was being asked kind of bogus questions, like he would still make an effort to like give it an interesting response. And yeah,
he saved his hostility for the multi-layered mind games he played on everyone who worked for it.
Or Shelley Duvall. Yeah, well, exactly. Anybody, but especially her.
Yeah. There's an interview with him also with Rolling Stone, I believe, probably from 68 or 69, where they're just asking him, you know, what does it mean pertaining to 2001? And he's really just, you know, I love it. Just you know, make it your own, you know, kind of, I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Sure.
And I think that is the right way to go. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast. And I think that it's maybe a little bit of a letdown, like when Tarantino says what was in the suitcase.
Exactly. Yes, I agree.
Or when Paul McCartney, and obviously, you know, everyone loves Beatles, but when Paul says what Blackbird was about, you know, something like that. And those are totally different than 2001, which I think does have some distinct meanings, but obviously there's a lot of debate about that. And I really love the trust and respect that Kubrick and creators at that time had in an audience to kind of discern their own meaning.
From time to time, for the day job, you know, we'll interview a filmmaker about this or that movie, and it's not an in-depth thing. They're usually press junkets, and it goes for 10 or 20 minutes at most. But the responses that we get sometimes are just very like, yes, you know, when the camera pushes in, it is trying to say this, and you know, when it cuts to the reverse angle, I want you to think about that, and then when we rack focus to this other thing, it's supposed to tell the audience that blah blah blah. And I'm just thinking, like, don't say that. Like, I mean, if you've really like done your job as a filmmaker, the audience is going to intuit that, and but maybe they're going to intuit it like 5 or 10% different than how you were, but for them it's going to resonate. And I feel like, yeah, you have to, if you're creating things, you need to let that breathe and let that be out in the world and let people have their own relationship to it, and not just like say, this is exactly what this, like this very literal thing, you know? I forget which the kind of the classical Hollywood producers it was, maybe like Louis B. Mayer or somebody's, you know, the quote was, if you want to send a message, call Western Union. Like, that's not what film is. Film is more than that. Film is to do the thing that you can't do in just plain spoken language. So but of course, I mean, there's all kinds of other reasons, like market forces. People are out there trying to sell their movie. It's harder than ever to sell a movie. And if you leave too much ambiguity, or you're too cagey about answering things, then, you know, maybe people don't go see the movie at this point. So I understand filmmakers today are probably in a tougher position too, but yeah, I'm always more sympathetic to that kind of open-ended, like, well, what do you think kind of response to these questions? Like, don't just tell me this is what the monolith in 2001 means, and you can go about your day and never think about it again, you know? There's
someone like, I think, is it Robert Eggers who made The Witch and The Lighthouse? Yeah, and I think that those are very open-ended movies, particularly The Lighthouse. But yeah, I think that's still in that realm. I think it might be those are, you know, among the best movies I think I've seen, you know, within the last few years. So yeah, I definitely think folks are still doing it, and I think those were relatively successful. I think my only knock on The Lighthouse is I think maybe it might be a little too open-ended, or maybe I'm just dumb. But I really do get excited though when I see movies like that are at like a Christopher Nolan level of like how well it could be shot, but it has like Kubrick, well, not Kubrick, but just, dialogue and moments that trust the audience, like we were talking about.
I did prefer The Witch over The Lighthouse.
Yeah.
And yeah, Eggers, in interviews that I've read, like he's really happy to talk about research and talk about like all the kind of things that are informing the movie, without maybe having to push too far into like just giving the audience like a decoded meaning of everything. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a way to be very open as an artist to talk about process or to talk about inspiration, things like that, without having to just like reduce it to this means that,
Mm-hmm. Casey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your relationship to Radiohead, general connection with them or relationship to their music, when you discovered them, and what that kind of looks like for you now at this point in their career and your fandom.
Sure. So I think my first exposure to Radiohead was around the OK Computer era. I was not aware of them. Really, like, I don't think I'd heard Creep. I just randomly saw Paranoid Android on MTV one day, the music video.
Yeah.
And that really left an impression. And at that era, I was reading a lot of like Spin Magazine, Rolling Stone. So as the album came out and it was making like all the top 10 lists and it was having all these articles written about it and interviews with the band and that sort of thing, I just had a general awareness that like there's this band Radiohead that's generating a lot of buzz, and people seem really into it. But I hadn't actually heard the album. I remember I was at a friend of mine's house and his mom was listening to OK Computer. And I was like, this is interesting. This is kind of unlike anything I've heard before. And I want to know more about it. And so I guess probably near the end of 97, beginning of 98 is when I bought the CD. And I mean, I just loved it. And I immediately went out, got the Benz. I probably got Pablo Honey, although I actually don't remember to this day if I have a physical copy of Pablo Honey or not. So it probably gives you a little bit of my position on that album. Although I do like some songs off of it.
Sure.
But it's not like I'm not reaching for Pablo Honey most of the time. But I absolutely love the Benz, loved OK Computer. And I was a very, I was kind of your typical profile of like a somewhat lonely, depressed, alienated teenager. So I know you guys are not hate to like pigeonhole Radiohead as like that's what they are, or that's what the music is, and I agree. It's not only that, but it did resonate quite a bit. Hearing those emotional registers that they can evoke, certainly resonated with me. And so this was around, I would have been probably like a freshman in high school when all this was going on, freshman and sophomore. And so, I was listening to OK Computer all the time. And then, the build up to Kid A began to happen. And that was really when my like obsession with the band just like fully blossomed in that Kid A era of Napster and the record like leaking, ahead of time.
Tree fingers
I can remember very
time.
Yeah, I can remember very clearly. Like, I had a friend who his birthday event was going to a Dave Matthews Band concert here in Atlanta. So I went to see Dave Matthews, who it's okay. I'm not like a hater, but I'm also not like a number one fan. So I went to this Dave Matthews concert. I came home that night and Kid A had like leaked onto Napster. And so I sat up on my computer till like 3 a.m, just downloading a track at a time. I can still remember very vividly, just like super late at night, the national anthem finished downloading, because they were all coming in like out of order, like one would finish ahead of the other. This was still like, it wasn't quite 56K modem days, but it was like pretty slow cable modem. So, it would take like 30 minutes for one song to download. And so, the national anthem finished downloading. I clicked play on it, heard that bass line, just heard like that crazy expanded soundscape and like the jazz horns at the end and just like the intensity of it, and just felt like this is like the best band in the world. This is incredible. I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. And so that was just such a moment. I continued to be just absolutely obsessed with them through Kid A, through Amnesiac. it was a long period between, or it seemed anyway, like a long period between Amnesiac and In Rainbows. So in those years, my musical taste expanded quite a lot, drifted quite a lot, but I was still there like day one when they put that thing up for Name Your Own Price and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was there right away, and I did actually send them some money. I did actually buy a physical copy, all that. So it just continued on, and yeah, anyway, I could ramble forever, but that gives you, I guess, some idea. I mean, I would say like Radiohead was like, it felt like it was part of my identity. Like it was beyond just like liking a band,
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of other bands that I liked. Like before I got into Radiohead, I was super into Beck, but I wouldn't like introduce myself as like a Beck fan or something, know?
Sure.
Like, not that I would introduce myself as a Radio fan either, but it was just the sort of thing. If you met somebody and you found out they were into Radiohead too, it was like you guys were immediate friends. Like it's just like, oh my God, you know about that band? Like they're so incredible. And have you heard this? And so, yeah, Radiohead was just like a huge, huge part of my whole like teenage experience. And I still love Radiohead. I'm still a big, big fan, but it's never been more intense than like that period.
Yeah,
sure. Are you following the Smile and
I have to say, like, I've only heard the album a couple times.
Okay.
So I need to give it more listens. I like what I've heard. But it so far has not like gripped me in the same way that even like a Moonshaped Pool, really, really pulled me back into the band heavily. I like a lot about the Smile. There's something about it where I'm like, but I wish it was a Radiohead record. I wish it just had that extra, whatever that extra thing is when you add the other guys in. And
we call that extra thing Ed.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So, but I mean, I'm glad that they're doing it. I'm glad that they're seem to be having this kind of like burst of inspiration. That's like a second album that's going to be coming out like in pretty rapid succession, and there's new songs all the time. And I mean, it's really cool. I think it's really, really cool. And I just need to give it, more of my attention, really.
So Moonshaped Pool was your Michael Corleone Godfather 3 moment of they pulled me back in. No.
That's right. I mean, I love the King of Limbs. I like quite a lot as well. I would say I just realized I skipped over Hail to the Thief when I was kind of laying out my Radiohead.
I know that spoke volumes, Casey.
And I mean, but at the time, like, I'm sure you guys can relate to this. At the time, like back, especially like in the CD era, if you bought something, whether you liked it or not, you were still going to listen to it like over and over and over.
Yeah.
And so that one, I mean, I like that. I do like that record, and I did listen to it over and over. And I again had the experience of downloading like the leaked version, and then noticing some of the differences between the leak and the real version. Especially Sit Down, Stand Up. I remember that being kind of a pronounced difference where I remember, I don't know if this is even correct, but in my memory anyway, in the leaked version, it doesn't have that electronic drum machine at the beginning.
Correct.
It's just the do 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 do, which I thought was so much better to not have that. Anyway,
pew pew.
That's just my little
pew pew pew.
Yeah, the laser sounds. That's just my little pet peeve. It's like, why? Like what?
They had to rush production on a few of them because the track listing was already set in a certain respect, and maybe even like the lyric booklet, lyric booklet and everything was set. So there'd been a ton of investment from EMI and probably from the band themselves.
Interesting.
As far as what the track listing was going to be. So for songs like Backdrifts, let's go chronologically. Sit Down, Stand Up, Backdrifts, and then Myxomatosis. And I think you could kind of hear it when you listen to it that those, regardless how good of songs they would ever be at their, complete finished version, I think there is a sense of either rushed in the case of Sit Down, Stand Up, and I do prefer the version that you're referring to as well. And then Backdrifts, you can really hear like a high level of aspirational production that maybe Radiohead had even surpassed in like Amnesiac and Kid A.
Right.
But I think that was part of it. And then you have, like some of my personal favorites of all time, like 2 + 2 = 5, and they're there, which are just rounded out to perfection. So I think that album, it's right in line with former guests we've had that I would venture to say their fanship sort of peaked at the same time yours did. I'm thinking of Jesse Rimler Walker. He, sort of had the same experience of like when he was the most passionate about the band as what you described. It's so funny. One thing you said that I really latched onto is being a Beck fan. but maybe not, to paraphrase, having them be as like intrinsic to your personhood as Radiohead is. And I could still relate to that because I love David Beck Hansen, or David Hansen Beck, whatever. But and I've seen him live several times. There is some Radiohead overlap. You know, he's worked with Nigel several times. He appears to take himself very seriously, but he can be really loose and funny on stage. And just an amazing performer that has gone from so many different genres and styles. But yes, for whatever reason, it's not as crazy, even though Beck might be like niche, but huge too. But when, like you said, when you meet somebody who's into the band Radiohead, it's not crazy, it's not uncommon. But there is something that you want to feel out their fanship. You know, I can only speak for myself and find out how deep it goes. How much can I nerd out with this person? Oh, you've only heard Reckoner and Creep. All right, well, nice meeting you. Or is it something, you know? I don't know. I really like
weirdly random ones. Reckoner. That's of all songs.
I'm only into the beginning and end.
Yeah. Well, people love Reckoner. There have been several covers of it. It was in that movie Choke, and it's
that's right.
I mean, maybe not the most mainstream, but like one of the prettier, slower, more palatable songs, I guess is what I mean to say. That is.
What if it was somebody who only listens to Creep, or no, only Pop Is Dead and Hunting Bears?
Oh yeah,
I
would love it if that person exists somewhere.
Yeah, they're just like, I don't need the rest of it.
They actually only listened to the live performance at the MTV Beach House where Tom almost like shocked himself to death.
Yes. Yeah.
You guys know that story?
I don't think I do. It sounds like Zach does.
He almost electrocuted himself because he almost fell into the pool. So this is on the...
He was in the pool, but he was going to touch the mic cord or whatever and it wasn't grounded. Or I don't know how that stuff works, but somehow he could have shocked himself. He could have fried himself right there on live TV. And then like a PA or something like yanked it away at the last minute or something.
Well, no, Ed actually stepped in, which is why they allowed him to stay in the band.
Ed saved the day
because he saved the day. And they said, "Hey, you can't, not really. Anyone can't play guitar because you can't, Ed, but you can save time." I'm kidding. No, it wasn't. It's that's pretty. There's few things about Radiohead that make me cringe, but Radiohead in that era when they were still finding their style, and of course it's okay to be of the time, but I really think we talked about this going way back to our Ben's episode. What's so interesting is I think they were finding their identity both in the way they dressed and looked and how comfortable they were with themselves, like on the bends. But I think there was this very brief window of time when Radiohead was still very much under the thumb of the studio, when I think there was an effort to like, can Tom York be a sex symbol? And I think the answer is decidedly no, but also yes, because once they became more comfortable in that Amnesiac Up Through the In Rainbows era, he's more comfortable with himself, and that is what I think comes through. But like, yes, and the music video for Just, when he's in a leather jacket and it feels like they're being directed, and it's like, no, this isn't, anyways, I didn't
not us it
so much, but Walker, did you do you want to add
no, I mean, I well, look, I always have more to say about Radiohead, but I'm kind of curious to get into these selections that have been brought to the table. And I want to just, compliment the episode that we're recording right now and say that we have talked about film, we've talked about Radiohead, and now these things are about to come together, right? I mean, this is, I dare say we're on a 3-act structure here on this episode of Video Talk. Yeah, I'm curious. Well, we'll talk about them individually. The first, so we asked Casey to pick out for us some of his favorite uses of Radiohead in film or film collaborations that the band has done through some shorts, as well as Jonny Greenwood's scores that he's done for the last few. We took a select few, but basically he's, I think, worked with PTA Anderson on every film since There Will Be Blood that he's done. Which, by the way, I'm curious how John Bryan feels about that, but we'll discuss that.
I know,
because also wonderful.
I love the Magnolia score so much.
Oh, he's incredible too.
And it's like, it's just what happened. Like what?
Yeah,
I still want to know. I love Johnny, but I want to know what happened.
It could be like just as simple as a tonal, departure from what John Bryan does, or maybe there was a big fight. We'll never know.
There Will Be Blood does feel like that. It feels like PTA version 2.0 is sort of like it's a reboot in a way. Yeah.
Right. But then something like, now, did you get a chance to see Oh my God. What I'm blanking
Licorice
on
Pizza?
Thank you. Yeah. Did you get a chance to see that?
And I was going to try to watch it for this episode so I'd at least have something to say about the most recent one. But again, as insane as it is, because I saw Phantom Thread 4 times in the theater, right?
Sure.
Like opening day, and then just went back the next day and kept going. And but I have not gotten to Licorice Pizza yet. So but it's nice to know that it's there anytime. I have like a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie to watch just whenever I feel like it. So
yeah, that's incredibly exciting. And I will say, for purposes of our conversation, that movie has more needle drops than score,
right.
Even though Jonny Greenwood is doing the score. But that is one where if tonally he's done something that could fit the kind of John Bryan style, I in his last several movies, I would say it'd be that. But in any case, he and Jonny Greenwood have a very, very fruitful collaboration with each other. But the first thing that I loaded up here is the use of Everything in Its Right Place in the opening of Vanilla Sky.
Yes.
And I think there's a little, there we go. So that's playing in the background there. And why don't you talk to me about why this stands out to you and why you picked this?
This was like something about this movie. It came out pretty close to. I mean, it came out pretty close to the release of Kid A. I think it's like the next year, right? So
yes.
And at this point, even though Radiohead were like a huge band and everybody was talking about them in sort of like, tastemaker type circles, it still felt a little jarring and a little cool, like you were in on something secret when you saw, Everything in Its Right Place come up at the beginning of like a Tom Cruise movie, you know? And also like, I mean, it was because before this, Cameron Crowe had done like Jerry Maguire, he'd done
Almost Famous.
Yeah. It was I think immediately preceded this one.
Yeah.
And it just kind of felt like, I don't know, there's something very of its time in a way, but also kind of timeless, the way it's used here. I mean, I think it worked. It fundamentally works for the film and the tone they're trying to establish and the mood and everything. And I feel like Radiohead is one of the more difficult bands to use well in a film, in the sense that, at least me as a Radiohead fan, when I'm watching, if a Radiohead song comes on and it's just kind of like being used as like background filler, it's very distracting. It's like, don't do that. Don't just use Radiohead as wallpaper. Like, and I love the way that it's so central in this movie and in setting everything up. I mean, the movie honestly is drawing a lot of its impact, I would say, from using that Radiohead song, because if you looked at that sequence of Tom Cruise like getting ready in his apartment and so on, like it's not the most compelling thing just on a purely visual level, but married to this music and kind of setting the tone, it's like, this is really a memorable use of the song.
I think it's that's very well said, because I don't remember a ton about this movie apart from this opening, and I think that which is not to say that the movie's good or bad. I just have not seen it in a really long time, but I think that it's because of the music that opening scene is so strongly on my mind still all this time later. I think because it's cool to see an acted out version of what so many Radiohead songs are about for me, which is like the horror of daily routine.
For sure.
And just the terrifying banality of life and all your perfect little possessions in their right place. And that is what's happening, right? We're seeing him start his
you're
day.
seeing like his like swank apartment. At the time he has a flat screen TV that's on like a stand that like kind of like booms down to the ground automatically. Oh yeah. Which, whatever today, but at the time it was like, ooh, that's kind of fancy. And obviously like you see him like look in the mirror and he plucks out a gray hair.
That's one single hair that's out of place.
Yeah, exactly. And he kind of looks at himself like, okay, I still got it. And then like gets in his cool car and like starts driving down the street. And then the song fades out. I mean, the other thing that surprised me in revisiting the sequence is that the song doesn't even play for very long.
No.
They fade it out by the time he gets to the Lemons part. So it's really just like, I didn't time it, but it's maybe a minute or 45 seconds or something like that. Maybe a little longer, but
it's short. It's
short. It never comes
back like long in terms of a needle drop, right?
That is true. Yeah. A lot of needle drops are just obnoxiously short. I think it's like, if you're going to throw a song in there, like use it. Like, don't just, don't just put it up while they're like driving from one thing to another and then fade it back down like 10 seconds later. I also want to say there is another Radiohead song in this movie, and it's actually kind of the latter type of usage where I'm like, that song didn't need to be there, but they play I Might Be Wrong during like a bar scene.
I just saw that today, and I was kind of astonished by that.
It's like, as well as the first one works, the second one just kind of falls flat because it's like, what, you had to have like a second Radiohead song in there? You couldn't pick something different, or I don't know. Well, there's a lot of great needle drops in this movie. There's what is it? Fourth Time Around by Bob Dylan comes up in like a montage sequence with Penelope Cruz and Tom Cruise. That's really, really well done. So there's a lot of like great uses of music throughout this movie. And again, the music is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. But yeah, it's funny to compare and contrast the two Radiohead songs and how well one works and how just kind of perfunctory the second one is.
I love the needle drop right before he's going to go into surgery, and it's fully at the midpoint where you don't really, as the viewer, know what is full reality and what you're kind of like in David's sense of being. And it's that song "What If God Was One of Us," which is
right. Yeah,
but it just works so well. And I just want to say, it's astonishing to me. I know this movie is a remake of I think it's a Spanish film, and the movie does start with Penelope Cruz saying, "David, open your eyes," which is also how the movie closes. So it has this nice like circular motion, and I'm not the biggest Cameron Crowe fan. I do like Jerry Maguire, but I think it astonishes me, even though it's a remake, how well used this song is to set a tone. I mean, on so many levels. So like it tells us almost everything we need to know about David, or at least everything we think he like is projecting that he wants us to know about him.
Yep.
About his image and his appearance, that everything is in its right place, even though like his apartment is sort of messy from getting laid the night before, or whatever. But everything is in its right place. If there is something wrong, he'll pluck it out. It's so smart. But then as the film progresses, even within that first 2 minutes, we see that everything is not in its right place. Just like with the song, as Tom's vocal affectation gets more chaotic, or it gets harder and harder to find the tonal center, and it's so like it conveys a sense of disorientation, confusion, anger, just as like, which is what David's arc is. And I just like, the last thing I just want to say is I feel like this marks the point of like Tom Cruise's experimental take me seriously as an actor phase.
Right.
Like it's after Magnolia.
Yep.
It's obviously Cameron Crowe saw Eyes Wide Shut. I think this movie has a little bit of that, some influence on it.
Yep.
And I just love it. I think it is my favorite Tom Cruise performance, like even in the scenes when he's just yelling tech support. I'm like, this guy is such a good actor. And we're not here to talk about Tom Cruise, but I just think that the use of Radiohead's music in that moment, I do agree. I Might Be Wrong is a little ham-fisted. I think if you examine the words of that song and where it's placed, it works, but it's more ham-fisted. So it's more Cameron Crowe.
I do get why he used it. Like I understand that it's about him starting to question the fundamental nature of his reality, and like, because that's in the bar scene where he tells people, like, he has a thought that these people should shut up and listen, and everybody just stops talking, and like I get all that, but it's just it's just a very flat, static kind of use of it, whereas the first one is like fluid and cinematic, and there's not like really he built that whole sequence around everything in its right place, whereas the second time it's just like static camera. It's kind of mixed low. They're talking over it. It's that kind of use of music and film that a lot of time irks me, even though I do get that there was a thematic reason for him to do that. It's just, it doesn't hold up to certainly the heights of the first one. So,
and I think you said this in one way or the other, but I love how that song, Kid was released October 2nd, 2000. And that movie was shot in 2000, which is why the Twin Towers still appear in it. But it just, it serves as a timestamp for the year and the era of the film's release in a nice way that doesn't feel so ham-fisted and dated as other Cameron Crowe films do. Like, and maybe that's just because it's Radiohead and I'm looking at it in a more favorable light, but I don't think so. I think that it really feels nice to remind you that, hey, this movie was made in the year 2000. And then, and just the last little thing I want to say is I think that is a really, really, really great Cameron Diaz performance too. It's not somebody
that was what struck me, because I actually did rewatch the whole thing this week. But yeah, I had forgotten just how menacing and scary and intense and those scenes with her are.
Yes.
Of like Tom Cruise having this realization that, oh no, like she's really like gone.
She's gonna
like,
kill us.
Yeah, like I thought this was fun and casual, and I'm completely wrong. I'm completely misjudged the nature of this relationship. That it's a really, really strong performance for sure. And I did want to say, like, the Vanilla Sky, it does capture this like pre 9/11 moment. I feel like better than almost any other film I can think of.
Totally.
Of like, it's the tail end of the 90s. Of course, it's 2000, 2001, but there's every decade has like that overhang from the decade before that sticks around for a few years before you kind of figure out what the new thing is going to be. Unfortunately for us, it was 9/11 and the war on terror and George W. Bush, all this kind of stuff. But there's just something, I don't know. It's an accidental period piece in a way.
Absolutely.
And even with the opening in Times Square being empty, it's like the perfect metaphor for like what that is, of like 90s prosperity and, New York is the center of the world and America is kind of at the height of its powers and so on. And it's the end of history and all this kind of stuff. And then all the stuff that followed afterwards, and
everything is so placid in our culture at this moment, seemingly, that I think
the stakes are so low in a way that like it's just about a rich guy.
Simulation idea is why it's so popular around that time in film too. Of just like the question is, there's got to be more than this, right?
Yeah, right.
And I feel like that question is asked in cinema less right now. The question is more like, how quickly are things going to completely fall apart?
Yeah, what are we going to do? Like, it's not
exactly.
Yeah. They do fall apart in a way that is so much more relatable than like, these world-ending films, where like Armageddon, but whatever modern version of that is, the world is ending with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as your star, who I love.
Right.
But I'm not rich and living in a Manhattan apartment, but it's absolutely feasible that I could get into an accident that, physically disfigures me, and dealing with the depression and the way he kind of treats that. And I'm not saying it's that relatable, but it is really the sort of centered, and I love that we get to see Tom Cruise. Like, there's certain scenes where he's shot yelling at the medical board where you could tell, this guy's 5'7", and that's okay. It's on display.
Yeah.
It's the last time that we get to see Tom Cruise looking somewhat natural. And I mean, the fact that he is disfigured, like, we never see Tom Cruise in a vulnerable position like that. So it really is, in a way, where in the same way Eyes Wide Shut, where it's like he was under the thumb of the director. Right. He probably had a lot more latitude and leeway with Cameron Crowe, but I mean, now we never see Tom Cruise in a position of vulnerability. And I love that so much.
What you had said earlier about, like, this is the last gasp of Tom Cruise in his sort of like take me seriously period.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was actually Tom Cruise and his production company that optioned the original Spanish movie for a remake, and they had to convince Cameron Crowe to do it because he usually was always writer director. He was always working from his own original scripts, and so when they brought this to him, having done Jerry Maguire and so on, he was like, I think Cameron would be right for it, whatever. He was resistant to the idea, so it took some convincing on Tom Cruise's part for Cameron Crowe to do it. And I think it's such a, like, looking back, it's like, why did they think Cameron Crowe could do this movie even? Like, what was it about Cameron Crowe's past filmography that suggested that this movie would be a good fit? But it really was. Like, I mean, I think it totally works, but it's a weird pick in a way, because I would have gone, I don't know, somebody that had like more darkness or more like kind of, just
seems like a
different sort of filmography
or something.
Exactly. Something like somebody like that. Like, why get Cameron Crowe? But the only thing that makes a lot of sense is the centrality of music in the movie, is a big part of what Crowe brings to it, and I think what works about it. So in that sense, it works. But I don't know if that was even suggested in the original material, or if that's just how it went once Cameron Crowe was working on it.
Well, I think where he really succeeds is in the when Penelope Cruz and Tom Cruise are developing their love story. It's so Cameron Crowe. There's cheesy music in the background. They're being cheesy, their flirtation feels genuine and real.
They do another needle drop of Salisbury Hill, right?
Yes,
which I think was in Jerry Maguire, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and so it's a nice callback, and it's like it's almost Cameron Crowe poking fun at himself, like
and you're like, come the fuck on, like. But then as the movie progresses, you go, oh, that wasn't, like, that could have been totally something else. And so I think he really succeeds where he can be just a little bit cringe, for me. But then, the scenes of him with Kurt Russell, wearing the eyes wide shut mask, are so dark and so ambiguous and puzzling. It, like you said, it's not Cameron Crowe's usual style, but that was all I had. I could obviously go on and on, but just really great.
The last thing I'll say is like the timing of the release of the movie is unreal because it came out, I believe, November 2001. Mm-hmm. So it's actually coming out a couple months after 9/11. And you have, of course, the towers in the background. Then you have Tom Cruise jumping off a skyscraper and like being shown falling to the ground and pretty like not graphic, but I mean, the moment goes on for quite a while, and it's impossible not to think of the parallels to 9/11 when you're watching that, even though he's on a different skyscraper and so on. And then also what struck me at the time was the track that's playing during that climactic scene is a Sigur Rós song off of the Symbol, the Parentheses album. I don't know if there's another name for it, but and it's actually it was so like so on the cutting edge or whatever of that. It wasn't even the studio version. It was like a live version because they hadn't recorded it in the studio yet. So,
oh wow.
And I remember like I was a big Sigur Rós fan at the time. So I was following as they were playing new songs in concert. I was downloading the bootlegs and stuff. And so I knew that song when it came on. It's like, this is like a live version. This is crazy. Like, I just love how he really dialed into like the zeitgeist of that particular moment with so many of those musical selections and it all happened so close to when it was happening in the real world. He was really like kind of on the cutting edge in that particular moment, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and for that to happen in like a big budget Tom Cruise movie is just insane.
I think Tom Cruise probably was instrumental in that because I know Tom Cruise was a huge Radiohead fan, saw them live on the Kid A tour. And then I know Cameron Crowe's long-term partner, I think of many years, was, I forget which Wilson sister, but the guitar player of the band Heart.
Okay.
And so, she's, I mean, he definitely surrounds himself with people that I think had great taste. He was really wanted to get Radiohead in. I know that Cameron Crowe is a huge Radiohead fan, but and how funny is it that they even mentioned Radiohead by name? He and Jason Lee. What should we listen to? Radiohead?
They name check Radiohead in the movie.
Yeah, as the accident is about to happen, the
with
first
Jason
time
Lee.
It doesn't culminate, but it's in the glove box, and
they're picking out what CD to listen to, and those are the three bands he throws out as options, and then they almost die in a car accident.
It'd be great if it was like even less artful than that, and it's like they're not picking out a CD, but Jason Lee's like, "Hey man, you seem distracted. What are you thinking about?" And it's just how much I like that band Radiohead.
Yeah,
their really album Kid A just came out. It does feel like
that. I mean, that line falls so flat every time. Like there's just something fundamentally unbelievable about it. With Tom Cruise saying Radiohead, it's funny.
I know.
If me and Zach write a movie ever, there's going to be a lengthy, stilted dialogue exchange about how much the characters love Radiohead and wish they, whenever people aren't listening to Radiohead, they should be saying, "Hey, why aren't we listening to Radiohead right now?"
I love it.
So, Casey, another thing you picked that was actually new to me was the Paul Thomas Anderson. I suppose you could call it a music video. We can get a little more into how you would define this, but really kind of a short film set to the song Daydreaming, another Radiohead proper song that's from A Moon-Shaped Pool. Yeah, so there's this short film. I'm going to play the song in the background here. But yeah, why did this Daydreaming video stand out to you?
Wow, I feel like it's such a strong piece of work visually to accompany the song. This is the way I experienced the song for the first time because when they first started announcing that the album was going to come out, I'm pretty sure this was the first thing anybody heard or saw, and it was, in my memory anyway, it was the video and the song at the same time. It wasn't like you got the song on its own first. So I remember I was in my cubicle at work. I was like editing something, then I saw an email or a tweet or a text or whatever. New Radiohead song. Okay, let's watch it. And I almost I even debated with myself, do I want to watch it at work? Do I want to wait until I'm like at home? I can really just fully immerse myself, reckon with this thing. I'm not going to have somebody tap on my shoulder halfway through and interrupt it or whatever. But I went ahead and watched it at work, and I was immediately, I love Daydreaming. It's one of my favorite Radiohead songs anyway. And just so many things struck me about it. I would say in terms of the music, that piano, just how it feels like they've kind of integrated so much of Jonny's orchestral work back into the band in a way. Also, the standpoint from which he's writing feels really different and older and more mature for Radiohead. Obviously, there's the backstory behind the album and everything that was going on in Tom's personal life, and I don't know about the other band members, but it just the whole album feels like just an older band that's been through really, really tough stuff in their life. And I was thinking the other day about how, like, OK Computer especially is the sound of youth. It's like it's the sound of people in their 20s who were like rebelling and fighting against the system, fighting against the world, and sort of, sticking a middle finger to the IMF or whatever, and just sort of being like, all that exists, this is all shit, I hate it, just like anti everything. But of course, trying to argue for a better way of life and so on. But by the time you get to Daydreaming, I feel like, and the video evokes this too, it's really more about almost like middle age. It's about life becoming less black and white and more gray, and about ambivalence and ambiguity, and things not being so cut and dry, and the way that even our experience of time as we age becomes more kind of fluid and slippery in a way. Like things that were 5 years ago can feel like 5 minutes ago, in a way that I think when you're younger, even a year feels like an eternity. But when you get to this like longer stretch, this middle stretch of your life, years pass like weeks sometimes. And I feel like the video captures that so well, the kind of visual metaphor that Paul Thomas Anderson is using of him walking through the series of doors, walking through these kind of banal domestic settings, and
a laundry and such.
Yeah, the laundry and
endless kind of apartment corridors, like suburban homes,
exactly.
And, ugly elevators.
And it's really cool. It's sort of like the banality of existence, of daily existence, which I think Radiohead is always they've always alluded to that, but they've alluded to it in a more kind of like hostile way, I guess. And this is more just sort of like fully integrated. Like this is just what it is to be a human at some level. Everybody deals with this. It doesn't matter if you're Tom York or Tom Cruise or whatever. Like everybody has this experience of life sometimes, of just the monotony and the sameness and the kind of it's not all high drama. Some of it is just kind of you're daydreaming. You're kind of wandering through your life. You're in a bit of a fog. And I just feel like the song and the video evoke that so well. I mean, I know people have gone. Are you guys familiar with like some of this numerology, symbology, and stuff that's kind of like buried within the video?
No, not at all.
Within this video, no.
Okay, so, and I'm not an expert on this either, so I may get some of this wrong, but roughly speaking, the number of doorways that he passes through, I believe, is correlated with the number of years the band has been together. Because there's the sort of reverse masking part at the end of the song where he's saying half of my life, which is both a reference, I believe, to his relationship with his former wife, and also possibly the band as well. But it's this feeling of like you've reached the middle point, and now you're looking back and you realize that maybe the most dramatic and momentous things may be behind you, and now you're kind of confronting this like stretch of middle age where things are going to take longer in a way. I mean, the amount of time the Radiohead takes between records now, and the question we all have at the moment of like, will there even be another Radiohead record? I mean, I hope there will be. It seems like there will be, but things just don't feel so guaranteed the way they did for a long time, and people's lives branch off in different directions. And I feel somehow that this video and this song encapsulates all of that in just a few minutes time. Without really directly referencing much of any of that lyrically, somehow it all comes across. I mean, lyrically, the song is a little bit, it kind of, what's the word? It's a little obtuse. It's a little obscure, unless you know a little bit of the background, then you can fill in some of the blanks about the white room and all that, the window and where the sun shines through. Maybe that's talking about a hospital room, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I was just blown away by this video. And obviously the cinematography is beautiful. I love that opening shot where you have Tom walking towards the camera in this, looks like a tunnel, like a parking garage or something like that. And you have these other people out of focus further behind him in the background. And it's kind of overexposed. And it's sort of like, it's from the perspective of if your eyes had adjusted to the interior light and you were looking out at the exterior light, you would kind of be overwhelmed by it. And Tom just kind of wanders forward in this daze. And the people behind him almost have the sense of like sleepwalkers or zombies or something, even though that may just be what I'm projecting onto it. But it has the feeling of you're sort of in this dream that Tom is having of possible lives or actual lives that he's lived within his life and these domestic spaces. And I don't know, to me, it's just a very powerful, evocative thing altogether. Like you said, it's not necessarily a music video per se. You don't have the band performing. It's not really, it's not necessarily like a tool to sell records. It's something else. It's just like a piece of art that stands on its own.
P.T. Anderson really, short film.
Yeah, it really is. And it's, I don't know. I really love it. It's one of my favorite things that either of them have done. And for them to have done it kind of together is just really, really powerful.
It's really gorgeous. And like, I'm really glad that I'm just, one thing that has come up for me doing this show is I've realized I'm just not a big music video guy. I don't really take the time to sit down and watch them on a regular basis. So there's even classic Radiohead music videos that if I haven't happened to see it at this point, I just haven't seen it. So I'm really glad that I sat down and watched this because I love so much what you're saying about it and the visual metaphor of the whole thing. That arc of kind of the perspective in Radiohead songwriting is something that came up a lot for us on our In Rainbows episode. You know, just this idea that Radiohead are a very anxious band, in my opinion, in terms of their sound and lyrical content. And Tom, as a songwriter, seems really, really fascinated with and stuck on kind of the contradictions of everyday existence, whether it's in capitalism or the silly things we do to be a part of society or political contradictions, you know, all that stuff. And in the early records, or the contradictions of being a walking, breathing human being while feeling like you're, you know, going absolutely insane, right?
Yeah,
or your brain's on fire. And in the early mid Radiohead, the reaction to that seems to be a lot more anger.
Sure.
And by the time you get to In Rainbows, I feel like there is more of just like this kind of slightly detached and neutral acceptance of that. And it's a really nice arc for the band's point of view as they're kind of aging. And I feel like in this video, as he's going through all these doors, there is a feeling of he's looking for something. He's trying to figure out where he's supposed to be, and he's lost. And then by the end, when he's in the snow, and then the very end, when he's eventually in that little cave, I don't know that it seems that he has found the destination he was seeking so much as he's just like, I'm going to seek comfort or peace in this place that I ended up.
Right.
And I really loved that about it.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like he has some big epiphany. It's just like, I'm here now. I'm safe. I'm warm. I have some form of shelter. That's the best as I can ask for.
Yeah, totally.
I loved what you were saying, Casey, about how like it's sort of from Tom's perspective, or, you know, we could project our own onto it, just sort of like dealing with the banality of life. And in comparison to, I think of Amnesiac as the album where, you know, Kid A, I feel like he's talking a lot about like the grandiosity of like climate catastrophe, which is absolutely something to vent about and to think about. But with, I think about like Packed Like Sardines, or I Might Be Wrong. And I feel like it is, and we talked about this a lot and speculated during when we talked about that album, but it is somebody dealing with the banality of life, with learning to function in society, and how frustrating that can be, even if you're a normal person that's not And there's a moment in this video where Tom is certainly not an actor, but it's probably at the midpoint, and when he's walking around the parking garage, and he does this kind of like half smile, and you could and I interpret it as like, oh, this is following the social interaction we just saw, even though time is disjointed. And I don't know how many times that's happened to either of you, when it's kind of like you witness a family maybe having a nice moment, or friends interacting in a way that maybe you wouldn't engage, and you kind of just walk away and like do a half smile, like, oh, that was funny, you know. Or maybe teenagers, you reminded of youth or something. It's just,
sure.
I don't want to project too much, but I guess I do have a question for the both of you. So it's towards the end at minute 5:38 to 5:45, when Tom is crawling through the entrance of the cave. I think I see a visual trick, and this is what I think I see. Tom appears to pass into shadow, and this could have just been the light on my computer screen or what, but I watched it like 20 times. And so he seems to pass into shadow as he's crawling through the entrance to the cave, and his hair has a really blonde sheen to it, and he appears, and his hair appears much shorter for like 1 to 2 seconds, very reminiscent of like the Pablo Honey Benz era, and it's really difficult to make out. And I could be imagining it, but I was curious if either of you saw that, and it doesn't maybe seem like either you did, but I don't know.
I did not catch that. No,
I'm going to pull this up right now because I'm intrigued.
It's because he passes through that blue light shadow, and I'm wondering if it speaks to like time is a flat circle, kind of like you were talking about a little bit, and maybe it just, I'm not sure.
I think I see what you're talking about.
So
I see where the light kind of crosses his head for a second.
Yes,
and you get a little sense of maybe, I don't know. It sounds far-fetched, but at the same time, like this is such a...
It fits in with what you were talking about.
Exactly, it fits in, and it's kind of, they clearly went to a lot of links to embed, I think, a little bit more symbolism and sort of like there was just a lot of thought put into this. So I wouldn't rule it out. It is possible that maybe, yeah, there's some little like hint there of him passing through the stages of life and youth and age, and how his appearance earlier on and his appearance now and all that. It could be.
Just one other 2 quick notes, and Casey, help me out with my terminology here if I'm misusing these words, but I really like how the camera is like locked down and precise when it's moving across a highly organized environment, like a house with like a stairway and all these right angles and so forth. And then it does get more like handheld and shaky operation and less stable environments, like the beach. And just knowing that, I love how much P.T. Anderson seems to love water in the beach. It makes an appearance, and even if there will be blood preceding his brother's death, you know,
right? Snake brother, yeah.
At 4:43, the tone of the journey takes like a distinctive turn from traveling through regular real world environments to something much more kind of ominous and isolated. And I just wanted to say, the stairway that Tom seems to ascend at 4:43 looks like the bathroom coloration in The Shining. It's like various shades of green, and the lighting is very distinct. It's not necessarily Kubrickian or anything, but it's just great use of lighting. And Tom emerges in this like low angle shot, and the movement of the camera and just what's on screen really reminds me of like the helicopter shots and the overlook, and Jack towards the end of The Shining when it's like kind of below Jack. And as I was writing this, I was like, ooh, that's like a good observation, Zach. And then I was thinking, it's so funny how Kubrick lighting and general iconography is so distinct and also so universal that almost everything with a certain flair could be an homage to Kubrick or not at all. You know, it's like, it's really cracked me up. I was like, oh, I see that. And I do think there's some... Anyway, yeah, please speak on that if you have any thoughts.
That's a beautiful shot. I just pulled it up and looked at the 4:43. Yeah, I mean that blown out window. I mean Kubrick would do that all the time. Just let the windows go. Like in film, you know, you can absolutely control that exposure. You can put what's called ND, neutral density gel, over the window to knock down the level of light, and then you can actually see outside and you have a good exposure, interior and exterior. But there's obviously an evocativeness and a beauty to letting it just go. And especially when you're shooting on film, which I'm pretty sure this was shot on film. PTA is kind of a film purist. You get what's called the halation around the edges of the window, where it's not pure white. It's actually kind of red looking, which is based on how the light interacts with the film emulsion, and the red channel or the red layer kind of reflects back a little more strongly than some of the other layers of color when it gets to that overexposure point. So you get these kind of red edges around this pure white blown out window. It's just very, very beautiful, and you can emulate that in digital now. But you know, there's no substitute for the real thing. yeah, it is interesting. Like Kubrick, the stuff that is identified so closely with him are a lot of times it's things that are well within reach of like even a low budget ish production. Like anybody can let the windows go, right? Anybody can sort of rely more on, say, practical lighting versus having a big studio lighting rig set up, that kind of thing. But it's really just the eye for aesthetics that Kubrick had versus your average director, cinematographer, whatever, that makes the difference there, I think. And the fact that Kubrick does it always with a real intentionality to it. It's not amateur. It's like somebody who could make it look as polished as 2001, for instance, where you really wouldn't see these sort of visual quote unquote defects. It's more about the kind of eerie perfection of it all when you're looking at the interiors of the spaceship and that kind of thing. But letting the natural world just sort of like speak as the natural world in a context like this, when he's walking through this hallway, is just, yeah, it's great. It also reminds me, I don't know if you guys have seen it, the Gus Van Sant film Elephant.
No.
There's some beautiful tracking shots and Steadicam shots in that movie, and there's a kind of similar sequence where it's following behind a character and they walk up a staircase, and the light coming from these windows almost seems like otherworldly because of how heavily it overexposes on the film. And it's also shot in like over crank, so they're shooting maybe 48 or 60 frames a second, playing it back at 24. So it's got that nice slow motion, fluid movement to it. Very floaty, very dreamy. Yeah, I don't know. It's I'm a sucker for all of that, all the above, So this video just kind of hits every area that would resonate with me in terms of the way it's filmed and what it's all kind of adding up to.
Yeah, I loved it.
I think there's kind of possibly a somewhat intentional talking about moving through time and maybe moving through, Radiohead's career, Tom's life a little bit. I think there might be an intentional callback in this video too to the Karma Police video.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm overreaching here, but when he's on, I believe, the elevator, or the lift, as he would call it.
Right.
There's only one instance of lip syncing to the song in this video. I believe it's that This Goes Beyond Me, Beyond You.
Interesting.
And it just reminded me of in the Karma Police video that he only lip syncs to the This Is What You Get. And even in the first chorus stops in the middle of the chorus.
Right.
And it's kind of barely making an effort to be in sync, and it feels like it's in that very Radioheady way, kind of calling out the artifice of the whole medium of having a music video.
Yeah, it's like that kind of like just ever present resentment of having to do any of this.
Right, exactly. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure how, if that's the intention here, kind of calling out that artifice again connects to what they're saying here, except that maybe it kind of pulls it back into a dreamy space, or maybe they're intentionally kind of going, hey, as we're moving through time, remember when we did this one thing somewhere in the middle of our career.
Yeah.
Or if it's a coincidence, but I tend to doubt it with the level of precision of Paul Thomas Anderson and Tom York that would kind of be at play here.
And it's something that I would almost never expect Radiohead to do, to like acknowledge their past in a way in a work like that, because they're always so like, they don't want to repeat what they've done before. They don't want to sort of like become in this weird insular self-referential thing,
Right.
But in this one instance, it's done so subtly that like you could watch it and just appreciate it on like the surface level, but if you want to go deeper, like there is more to it. It's very interesting. It's kind of, it feels like this song to me stands out from even the rest of A Moonshaped Pool. Is like, there's just something about it. I don't know. I can't
It's a
put it
grower.
in words. Yeah, it's a real grower, and it just it's like a State of the Union. It's like a mission statement, or I don't know. Maybe it points the way forward for what will come next for them. Hopefully, there's just something about it. It made a big impact on me.
I'll tell you, we'll have to get into it more deeply in our Moonshaped Pool episode, but I will say this has kind of always been a little bit of a lesser track for me on that album, and I think I kind of am hearing it for the first time, having watched it in conjunction with this video, or in harmony with this video, and it's standing out a lot more to me now, and feel it has a much bigger impact than it had. It's I've always thought it's a nice song, but just a little bit of a sleepy one for me, and so I think, what are we,
7 years.
7 years from this album, so this one's growing on me 7 years later, so it's got some staying power.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, all the great stuff does, right? It might take 10 years, but eventually it's going to hit.
What do y'all say we listen to some, speaking of PTA, that we listen to some of these selections from Jonny Greenwood's scores from, Casey specifically picked There Will Be Blood, The Master, and Phantom Thread. Jonny Greenwood did also do the scores to Inherent Vice and Licorice Pizza, but I think these are three really evocative kind of movie music collaborations. I'll just go in chronological order here. So I had some flexibility with what I picked. This is my favorite piece of music from There Will Be Blood.
Ooh,
this is the track is called Proven Lands.
Interesting.
And I'll let it play. We should talk over it a little bit, but it's also only about a minute and a half. So we can let it breathe for a second here if we want to.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's when the oil well is burning, I think, right?
Right? Don't you immediately see it in your mind?
It's also used in the trailer a bit, I think, as well, of I'm an oil man. I can almost picture Daniel Plainview. Great selection. This is actually, I want to hear from our guest, of course, but I was watching a video on Jonny Greenwood and sort of his admiration and influence from the French composer Olivier Messiaen and the Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki. I've heard of Penderecki and
I've heard Penderecki too, right? Or yes. Penderecki, and I'm honestly not sure which one at the end of the day
this person was British and did have the S, so I'm going to defer to them. Okay. But just that to achieve what I really hear as like a dripping sound almost that he's achieving on the strings, along with and what he was talking about is that Jonny Greenwood, what he was able to achieve on this score in particular is in his use of the way he touches the guitar and interacts with it in such a forceful manner, and the way he has been able to achieve that with strings, like different type of strings, is very, very unique. And I think Jonny Greenwood was still maybe finding his true sense of self, not confidence, but as when writing like film compositions, particularly on this movie, even though it wasn't his first go around. And I think that sort of that curiosity that must have been there, and you can really hear the Penderecki influence on this in particular. But it's so unique, and like I read, this is so nerdy, but like he put a leaf, like a literal leaf from an oak tree, and would rub it on the strings to achieve some of these noises. So just such a sense of wonder and curiosity that I would like to hear either one of you talk about. But just really, really, really cool stuff.
That's super cool. Yeah. I was watching just a YouTube interview with Jonny from, I think, 2021. He had performed some of his film music live somewhere, and he was talking about how, I mean, his approach as a composer, he's sort of like a composer who's not a composer in the best possible way. It's somebody that didn't, as far as I know, he didn't go to like conservatory or anything, right? Or did he? Does he have like
he didn't. He dropped out of what would be college and to study there, but he has since, like, Jonny Greenwood can sight read and use notation. But no, in terms of like classically trained, you wouldn't. Yeah, you would still not say that.
Right. So
largely self-taught.
Yeah, which I think really comes through in like I said, the best possible way as like somebody who just he doesn't have all these like sacred cows of like how it's supposed to be done or how it's always been done, or he doesn't worry about like going against the tradition or trying something different. And I think he's
still rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. And even in that interview, he was talking about like, he was talking about the concert that they were going to play that night or had played that night. He was like, the set list, you might think with classical music that it's like it's etched in stone and it's been that way for like months and we've just been rehearsing it over and over. But actually, like, we picked that stuff out like earlier tonight when we decided what we were going to play, and it's all these like shorter pieces, maybe 3-4 minutes long. So just the same way that Radiohead might switch up a set list from the night before, he was doing the same thing with the performance of some of his film music. And so like it shows that he approaches he kind of approaches quote unquote rock music the same as he approaches classical music. It's just all music to him.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't put on your composer's hat and just take on the attitude of somebody from 50 or 100 years ago because you're dealing with this different instrumentation.
Yeah.
You're just approaching it all as sound fundamentally. And so like his willingness to be experimental even while working in like a tradition, and obviously he's very comfortable and very willing to reference things from the past, whether it be Penderecki, whether it be Bernard Herrmann, whether it be as you said, Messiaen, things like that. Like he's taking it, but he's also he's pushing it somewhere new. It's not just imitation, right? It's like it's elaboration, development, and he's pushing it forward. And I think that's just so cool. The way that he is able to exist in both worlds that seem often so disconnected. I'm a big fan of Steve Reich, I think is how you pronounce it. In my head, I've always heard Steve Reich, but I think, but he did this thing in I believe the 2000s, like Radiohead Remix, I think it was called.
Oh,
you guys
okay,
familiar with that?
Yeah,
and I felt like I only maybe heard it once or twice, so I can't say too concretely, like I don't want to pass judgment on it too harshly, but it was just sort of like that was representing somebody that was pretty concretely, firmly in that orchestral classical mode, even though he's a kind of a non-traditional minimalist 20th century composer. There was just something like inert about it that I never feel in Jonny's classical work. Like it's just alive and it's breathing, and it's so uniquely suited, I think, for film, especially because film is all about like emotion and mood and tone. And his way of writing music, even if it may not, if you were to dissect it in a composition class next to some of the more like, let's say, disciplined or studied or traditional composers, there may be quote unquote mistakes. There may be things where it's like, well, that's not how it's done or whatever. It doesn't matter because it has an immediate visceral sort of impact on the listener, and it works for the film in a brilliant way. And even with what happened with the score to There Will Be Blood not being eligible for the Oscar or whatever, it's one of those things where it's just like, who even cares? Who even needs an Oscar? Because
why was it not?
Because it wasn't a wholly original. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, because basically there's a piece embedded within the film that he drew certain cues from that was a pre-existing work that he had done before he started work on There Will Be Blood, Popcorn Superhet Receiver.
Okay.
And so because it wasn't 100% written just for this film, it was deemed, ineligible for that reward. But it's like who cares? Because whatever won the Oscar that year, I'm sure it's fine. But this is one of the great film scores, and it just goes to that thing of like, you don't even need the Academy's recognition, like people know when people encounter this, that this is really something special and unique in the history of cinema.
Well, let me ask you this, Casey, because I definitely have kind of some thoughts on it, but I would love to hear yours. So, do you think of? Let me think of how to phrase this. Is Paul Thomas Anderson? I wrote down a surrogate for Jonny Greenwood's genius for unconventional melody in the same way as maybe like a Tom York. My thoughts are yes and no. I think on the one hand, I do think that the films of P.T. Anderson, as I think maybe you mentioned, have seen an increase in quality since that collaboration. And on the other hand, I think PTA has a stronger sense of self and completeness with or without Jonny than maybe Tom York might have. And that is to say, like, I love Tom York's solo stuff, but I think it is missing Radiohead in a way. So yeah, I think you take my meaning. But there are some interesting parallels to, like, the symbiosis of their relationship, PTA and Jonny, and then Tom and Jonny. And I was curious, either one of you, if you have thoughts on that, agreement, disagreement, kind of what you think there.
I would have to say I do think Paul Thomas Anderson can stand alone and apart from Jonny, because we know we've seen him do it with the first three films, right? And I mean, those are spectacular films as well, and his collaboration there with John Bryan and all that, I mean, is really, really strong. I do agree with you that, like, when I'm getting like the Eraser or other Tom solo stuff, like it does feel like there's like an essential ingredient that's kind of missing from Johnny's contributions and the other members as well. But particularly the way Jonny, the way he'll just like complicate a melody or add something to it that it just comes from another approach, and it's like it opens things up in a way and it expands things. But I don't know. I mean, Tom's a fantastic composer, musician as well. So
absolutely,
you know, it maybe we've still not yet to see like the maximum of what he can do just on his own. But yeah, I mean, based on what is out there already, I would say that while they're both sort of symbiotic, complementary relationships, I do think that for Radiohead to be Radiohead, it is kind of Tom plus Jonny plus the rest of the members. Whereas with Paul Thomas Anderson, it's like it works great when it's Jonny Greenwood, but it also works great when it's somebody else.
I think it's a good comparison. I mean, it's very speculative, but I think that the PTA Jonny Greenwood collaboration, it does kind of speak to Johnny's ability to take the ideas of another person who's not necessarily speaking his language and put them through like the Jonny laboratory and come up, because obviously like Tom York's musical vocabulary is vast and knowledgeable. I don't know about Paul Thomas Anderson, but I don't think he, as far as I know, he's not a musical guy, but I do feel that like that piece of music we just listened to and the There Will Be Blood soundtrack in general, they show that Jonny either has an incredibly intuitive understanding of the material, or I think more likely that he is really collaborating with Paul Thomas Anderson on this kind of conceptual level. Because when I hear that piece that we just heard, the percussion sounds like the machines that we're watching malfunction in the movie. And then the strings to me sound like, and again, this is just total speculation, but to me, it sounds like what is going on in Daniel Plainview's head. And that while on the surface, he's very deliberate and very powerful, kind of slow talking and slow moving. We don't see him in a hurry a lot or out of control of what he's saying a lot. But as we get to know him over the course of this movie, we do see that he's driven by a great deal of paranoia, fear of like destitution, I think a great deal of self-loathing. And so that crazy string section that's going on to me sounds like what Plainview is like keeping at bay behind his eyes the whole time. And that the only times we see that stuff kind of burst forward is like the baptism scene in the church when he really freaks out. And then when he's basically the final 15 minutes of the movie when he's like a drunken kind of decrepit mess.
Yeah.
And so that to me feels like very likely notes that are being given to him by Paul Thomas Anderson that would all be very feelings based and like vibe based. And Jonny Greenwood is the kind of genius who knows how to translate that into music from a very technical point of view.
I was thinking about this so hard and about this movie in particular. And like from the outset, the score, from the outset of the score, not the movie, but of the score, the listener gets the feeling that something ominous is on the horizon and is coming. I should say they pair so well in that way. But the score really underscores that. And then I wrote the barren mountainous landscape of There Will Be Blood reminds the viewer that Daniel Plainview is alone while he makes his fortune, and afterwards, as we see. And this overlaps really nicely with Kid A. Like in the barren mountainous landscape, the feeling that something is coming is what Stanley Donwood said he was trying to achieve with that artwork. And you know, it's like, you know, it's a desert and There Will Be Blood, and it's a like an Arctic wasteland in Kid A. And also, like, going back to my like surrogate comparison or whatnot, like I think Jonny Greenwood, clearly the whole band was reaching for something new melodically and instrumentation wise on Kid A. And I think that Tom York leads that because he's the singer and leader of the band. But I think Jonny is really, that's coming through a lot through, you know, Tom and the songs. And I just feel like There Will Be Blood, not to get all crazy, like, they're the same or whatever. But I was just thinking that even with like some of the visuals, like the mountains, it's just incredible.
That's a really good point. I'd never thought about the visual similarity, but yeah, that opening like 15, 20-minute stretch of There Will Be Blood before there's really any dialogue whatsoever. And it's all just those menacing Penderecki strings in those kind of like, what do you call it, like a tone cluster, those kind of swells. It's like, it's kind of discordant, but obviously it merges into the same kind of like menacing note by the end of it. It is kind of evoking the same thing. I mean, there's that first scene where it's after he's gotten injured and he's like hurt his leg, and there's like that pan of where he crawls up out of the hole, and then it pans over to the mountains, and like there's like, and it's sort of like your head fills in the picture of like he's got to make it all the way back to civilization. He's out here in just like the absolute wilderness. Like there's nobody's coming to save him. He's just completely and utterly alone. In this kind of like cosmic existential sense, and rewatching the movie, that stood out so much more to me this time, that he's beginning the film in this completely isolated way. And it's sort of like, this is like almost like the thing that he's trying to keep away for the rest of the movie, like his fear of like, I never want to return back to that place. I never want to find myself again.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, the great irony, tragedy, whatever you want to call it, of the film is that he ends up pushing everyone away, and that's where he does end up again. But it's through kind of his own foibles, his own emotional kind of hostility, what do you want to call it? Or is he sort of a victim of the system, of just kind of what happens when you invest fully in this mentality of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and nobody's going to help you, and
literally
everybody's going to get there on their own. Yeah, that's right. I never thought about that, but it's very true.
And the people that get hurt along the way, how that one gentleman who's in the hole just gets decapitated by the instrument, and he didn't mean to kill him, but it clearly doesn't really resonate with or register that much that another human being has been killed on the way to his fortune.
No, it doesn't seem to. He doesn't have nightmares about it. It's just like, it's just the way it goes. Better him than me.
I think Daniel Plainview is such a like great illustration of how weird and psychotic billionaires are, because he's a hoarder.
Sociopath.
Well, yeah. I mean, and really, it's just like we use that phrase of hoarding wealth, but when you're talking about like he's just so afraid of being back in that position. Yeah, I think that really is all he's doing the whole time. We don't see him like expressing his wealth through a great deal of like opulence, or like, there's no montage of him in like fancy furs with a new car at any point. It's just
big house
literally
I was gonna say, only at the end, it's like he's in this kind of weird mansion, that is pretty opulent. But yeah, throughout most of the movie, he's still like, I remember there was a moment kind of like halfway through where I guess when his brother shows up and all that, and it's like he's still living in a tent kind of, or like a cabin or whatever. It's like, come on, man. Like,
he's a penny pincher
like,
still.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be, because he's always suspicious of folks infringing on his wealth. And even in the end, when he does live in this mansion, and I do believe there's like a servant, sorts behind him, a butler, but that seems like his only sense of companionship or help. And I know, they're probably still using oil lamps and such, maybe. But it's dark in a way that like even now I feel like a rich kind of person that is alone would have dark paper spread all over the table, a bowling alley that nobody ever uses except to kill people. It's really just nice. Like, it just shows how isolated and alone he's made himself. Just the
bowling alley is an interesting metaphor, because like that's something you don't really need to have in your house. Even if money is not a question, it's like the whole point of a bowling alley is to go somewhere and be with other people, right? Like, there's even a book, I think it's called Bowling Alone. Have you guys heard of that?
No.
It's I haven't read it, so I can't really speak to it, but I think it's basically the idea behind the book is that, people bowling alone, like America has just become this very isolated country, and like where you used to have bowling leagues and you used to have like community and so on, now you have people bowling alone. It's just about, I'm going to the lane, I'm going to bowl myself. I don't have to wait on other people. Like, I'll go when I want to go, that sort of thing. And just the, that logic of, individuality and just, instant gratification, everything else that, kind of permeates and that it feels like kind of infects the brain of Daniel Plainview over the course of the movie, that he reaches this point where it's like, And even the last line where he says, "I'm finished." It's like,
yes,
what did you finish? What did you do? What was that all for? Like, what is this? What is the project here?
So, there's other Jonny Greenwood scores, but just being sensitive to some time constraints here, we're gonna skip ahead and talk about Phantom Thread. Now, the music that I picked from this is a piece called House of Woodcock.
Yes.
And I'd love to say there's a great deal of depth to why I made this choice, you guys. The reason I picked this one is because it is so darn pretty.
It's gorgeous.
and it sounds like this.
And it's interesting, the sequencing on the soundtrack album. It's like track 13.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think of Phantom Thread, this is like the opening song, I want to say. I mean, maybe there's some incidental music before it, but this is
him in the mirror, kind of getting ready.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really early on in the movie. If it's not the first thing, it's really close to it. And it's so much of like when the film is establishing his world and what the House of Woodcock is, and this kind of this life that he's built for himself. This is the thing that comes to mind, and it's so evocative of that period and just like the world. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody was writing about the score, and they were saying that this score has such a feeling of like lightness and delicate. The delicateness of the piano and so on is a really good metaphor, analog of the fashion and the attention to detail and the sort of, the light touch of cutting the garments just a certain way and everything being just the perfection of it. And then the beauty
its right
that
place,
evokes.
if you will.
Yeah, everything in its right place. Yeah, and just this also feels like, I mean, obviously this feels like it comes from an older era of film scoring. It feels like this could be in a Hitchcock movie or something. It's kind of classical Hollywood cinema, that kind of glamour and just the lushness of it. It's such a contrast to the harshness, let's say, of like a There Will Be Blood. So for the same composer to be so capable of both tones that are almost at odds with each other is just really, really, really cool.
I think it's astonishing that this is the same guy that we were just listening to.
Right.
And I love what you said about it being old Hollywood. I unfortunately don't really have the names pardon me. I don't really have command of the names of who did some of those old Hollywood scores, but this is immediately like I'm picturing, Vaseline on the camera lens.
Exactly. Yes. Totally.
And like a starlet on a fainting couch type of thing.
Absolutely.
As soon as I hear that. And I didn't know Jonny Greenwood could do this until I heard this. Everything that he's been a part of has such a strangeness to it up to this point, and then something that is so unapologetically beautiful is just really not what I associate with him.
I would say, like, as like an outsider, you could almost picture attempting to compose something of the order of There Will Be Blood, because it is so angular and harsh, and it's almost more rhythmic based than it is melodic based, although there is that too. But it feels like somebody could maybe begin to approach something like that. But this is so much more like it is the thing. It is like just this beautiful, lush, melodic, orchestral evocation of another era that's like on a whole another level. No amateur could ever approach this, could even begin to attempt to approach this, And so it's really, really cool that he got there so quickly too.
And it has a melody that you can hum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you can remember this.
One that lodges itself, that feels like it's going to be bouncing around your head for the rest of your life, I mean, it has that immediacy to it of like it's like an instant classic in my mind.
Well, this might seem such an easy go-to, but I listeners, I have listened to other classical music besides what Kubrick uses in his films. But after the Dawn of Man sequence, when we start to see the Journey to the Moon, I know those are pieces that were composed, some of them many hundreds of years before the film. But just the way I'm forgetting the name of the it's like the tripod or whatever the spinning spaceship is on those like exterior shots and the classical music playing it. It kind of reminds me of that, where it's just it's showing you the beauty of something, whether it's mechanical or not. And I feel like Phantom Thread, even though the end of it is somewhat ambiguous, I almost think of the three films, There Will Be Blood, The Master, and Phantom Thread. They kind of complete this nice arc. Whereas, like you were saying, like There Will Be Blood, even though it is an incredible achievement in its rhythm and its strings, it does fit nicely in achieving the ambiguity. Like we were talking about that atonal scrape on the mountains. I know it all converges on an F sharp, which is leaves like a lot of ambiguity. And then with the Master, even though the Master, I feel like there's a little bit more closure in the Master, even though they end in separate places, and there is like that ambiguity, a little bit of sense of dread and anxiety. Certainly, sometimes I think of the Master score like as like if I could imagine a sunset where it's illuminating like a lot of depression, but at least I'm going to think of that. And then Phantom Thread, it's not a happy movie per se, but there is just so much more lightness and melody in the composition. And I think that just speaks to Jonny Greenwood's ability to like service a song when he's with Radiohead. He can shred, he can do all this amazing stuff on a guitar, but he will play his own Martineau or a glockenspiel pending the song's need. And just like with collaborating with P.T. Anderson, like he can use, this may sound so dumb, but he can use silence. Like I think about,
yes,
that's the director's choice. It's not Jonny Greenwood's choice to score silence, but like I think about the scene in the Master. I know you want to talk about Phantom Thread, but I think about the scene of doing their Dianetics or processing.
Yeah, the auditing, right?
Yes, like that. There's no score accompanying that, and I could see if it were me or some other director like wanting to build the tension of that. Who the viewer in with something.
Yep.
And
sustained strings under that or something.
But it feels so real, and I've never wholly believed two actors were their character more than when I watched that movie. Of when he's saying like, have you ever had sex with a family member? Have you ever killed anyone? Denies both of them, but he's honing in on that, and then he says, have you ever killed anyone? And he says Japs in the war, and right away tells you so much you need to know that may have been missing about that. So we know he was in the Pacific, not in Europe. We know he killed somebody probably at a distance. Anyways, we've seen the movie. But I just was tripping on that because the music in that movie really moves the plot along. But when there's silence too, and I think that's so genius. Like, anyways, please, that's just a lot.
No, I was noticing exactly that during my rewatch of both There Will Be Blood and The Master, but especially as you said in The Master, the sort of the self-control or the discipline to not have like a wall-to-wall Jonny Greenwood score that I'm sure would be brilliant if you were to request that, but to be to have that confidence as a filmmaker to be like, no, there's absolutely no music in this moment whatsoever, and it resonates so strongly, it's very interesting the spaces that he chooses to use music versus not to use music in that film. One use that jumped out to me is where Joaquin Phoenix's character is Freddie Quell. He kind of comes across the boat for the first time. It's this long tracking shot, and you're following along him. Then Iraq focuses to the boat. You see people dancing on the boat. You kind of get your first glimpse of Philip Seymour Hoffman, and but what's interesting is that there's Jonny Greenwood's score, but then he also mixes up the sound of like a kind of a ragtime jazz band that's performing on the boat, and they're actually both playing at the same time. He doesn't dip down the Greenwood score entirely. He kind of lets them both play against each other, and they're not necessarily like I'm not I can read like drum notation, but I can't read music notation, so I'm not a music theory person at all. But it feels to me like they're not necessarily in the same key or the same anything. I mean, it kind of feels like two things at odds with each other, but somehow it does work. It doesn't become like completely atonal or jarring. It does blend together in some way, and I thought that was interesting too. That's got to be a hard thing to compose for, to know that you're going to be playing against some other piece of like natural music sound that was picked up on the day, and you're not even going to try to like marry up against that in a way that's you compose something for it. It's this weird collision of two musical things happening.
It's so genius too, because I feel like we see that Freddie is clearly comfortable with a ship, which, again, so we know that he's attracted to that, and the music is rather hopeful when he first sees it, and everything looks nice. But then you imagine being him on that boat, and like your two worlds are colliding, of alcoholic, potentially criminal, unstable PTSD person, and this new welcoming but somewhat creepy group of folks, and you can't quite figure it out. And I feel like the music colliding is just so genius. And even
it works too, because Freddie is just pure chaos. So of course there's like dissonant noise going on everywhere he goes.
There's this beautiful kind of like clarinet theme early on in the score. It's almost I mean, I know it's not random, but it kind of feels like random notes. Like it's not exactly.
Yeah, I agree actually.
But it's so evocative of like his loneliness and his inability to like fit in with anything. He's just always out of step, always saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing,
starting
fights and concocting his weird
and this has beverages. Like a silliness to it too. Like I feel like the kind of like a kind of like frivolous, like even though he's deeply hurt, deeply sad, deeply like wounded animal, he's operating kind of like it's all a big game,
His humor is like a defense mechanism, like when they're in that auditing scene later on and he farts and and they both laugh, and then but Philip Seymour Hoffman pretty quickly goes to like it's the sound of an animal and you're an animal, and
but he loves it.
He loves it. Yeah.
Like, I love what's his name, Lancaster
Dodd.
Yes. Lancaster Dodd.
Yeah, he loves so much that when he's around Freddie, he gets to just be this like id and a boy and just act like an adolescent wild thing,
I also love the music when after they get out of jail and it's their reunion. And it might be a different scene, but it's certainly like they haven't seen each other in a minute, and they have that hug that turns into like a rolling, friendly wrestling
they roll
match
in the front yard.
The score, if I recall correctly, is really joyful in that moment, and it does have a sense of ambiguity to it too, because in the background is Amy Adams saying, "Hey, the shit isn't cutting it," with Freddie, and I just want to just say real quickly, even though the two male leads of that film are once in a lifetime, in my opinion, in terms of their performance, Amy Adams, upon this most recent rewatch, she's just astonishing. And like one thing I noticed is she's astonishingly good, even in like a subtle way, in the very famous, to me at least, of pig fuck part.
Oh, it's so great.
You see her face. Yeah. It I'm not sure if it cuts or not, but it goes over to her, and my initial thought, even though I've seen it, was, she hears this a lot. She's being abused by this man behind the scene. Well, no, the very next scene, maybe there's a scene in between, but you see she is the woman behind the man. She's feeding him his confidence and a lot of his techno jargon. And I just think that was such a great choice. In the hands of any other director, it could feel like unnatural or something like that. But that is often the case. And it was just like, it really stood out to me this recent time. So.
Yeah, without her, he's probably much more like Freddie.
Yeah,
than he is, with her kind of harnessing his power and his ability to be charismatic and connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the old cliche, like behind a great man stands a woman.
Yeah,
that's how it goes.
Well, I think that kind of so I love that we ended up talking about the master anyway, and I think that there is connective tissue here. I mean, with Phantom Thread, a movie that I'm less familiar with than these other two. I have seen it, but it's been a little while. I think that's such an interesting movie, or an interesting story, that's also, this relationship is not what it seems on the surface. And listening to how pretty and almost kind of like syrupy sweet that piece of music from Phantom Thread is too, there's something happening there that I don't necessarily hear in these other two scores, which is, I think there's a sense of irony that's being played at here too, where that movie, while it doesn't have kind of the violent temper that The Master and There Will Be Blood have, it's also
it's not all good.
It's a love story about a deeply sick relationship.
Yeah,
so the idea of scoring it with these, these sweeping strings and this beautiful piano melody and these harp arpeggios and everything like that is also a little bit of a wink and a nod, I feel like, in a way that the other scores are not necessarily. What do you guys think?
Well, I remember like my first time watching Phantom Thread, like I had tried to stay away from any plot detail that may have been, available ahead of time. So just based on the trailers, I had my idea in my head of where the film was going to go. And I remember my impression of the trailer was that it made it look like the Daniel Day-Lewis character may become like psychotically violent by the end of the film.
I thought.
And obviously with There Will Be Blood, it's an obvious direction to go in. It's sort of like, oh, is this just going to be another like character study of a deeply messed up guy who hurts other people? And is that sort of, we're just going to go back to that well again? It's going to be a great Daniel Day-Lewis performance, but is it just sort of going to be like There Will Be Blood Part 2? Like what are we doing here? And so I was so like surprised and happy that it didn't go in that direction, that actually Reynolds Woodcock in a lot of ways is like a more delicate character, obviously, versus Daniel Plainview. But I mean, even just on his own terms, I mean, he's a sweet guy. He has his problems. He has, he's extremely neurotic. He can be very, very cruel, very brutal at times, but overall, he's a fundamentally different character than Plainview. And just the twist at the end, of course, watching it the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, in a million years, I would not have, could not have predicted that the movie would go that way. And so
is it Munchausen by proxy?
Yeah, exactly. It is. It totally is. It totally is. And it's such a weird thing to like, I can't think of any other movie.
And he loves it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like, it is like it's a symbiotic kind of thing. Like he needs that. Even though there's all these ethical, moral problems with it, it's like, I guess if it's the two of them in that relationship and they're both okay with it, then maybe there's not a problem. But, or at least, I mean, it's just, I love just the acknowledgement that like, yeah, they have a really screwed up relationship, but it kind of works. Right. So who are we to judge?
How many times have we seen that? Hopefully not to that level of manifestation, but not only in other people, but potentially, looking back maybe in our own lives, and I can't speak for myself and I'm not asking, but like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a pastime, I think, of couples, to be like, kind of, how do they do that or whatever. And I feel like kind of in the way that in Punch Drunk Love, when they come together and they're in their love bubble and they're speaking that couple languages they do, but it's more violent than any couple,
that kind of thing.
Yeah. I almost wonder if like Phantom Thread is like that too, where it's like, hey, if it works for them, but it's like that's literally unhealthy. But how much can you really speculate or judge? That's an open question.
And for those who haven't seen the movie explores a lot of things, but story-wise, it's about this workaholic designer, dressmaker, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, and he begins a relationship with a woman who, I think, kind of from his perspective and seemingly is a bit beneath him in terms of she's a working class person and he's living this opulent kind of fancy life of an artist and a famous artist at that. And they begin this very kind of opposites attract relationship. And basically she's able to help him kind of come back down to earth and recuperate and recharge through a very interesting method of poisoning him. And that's the Munchausen by proxy thing. And when she does that, it will kind of bring him back down to earth. And it kind of is this weird love story between him. He kind of appreciates her and loves her for it, is the way it left me feeling. And it's a very kind of extreme example of relationship dynamics that work, even if they seem a little bit odd from the outside. But a lot of relationships are kind of like that. And I think it might be kind of that thing of, you're talking about couples that you may know, and you might find out there's something non-traditional about their relationship. Like, hey, did you know that they have an open relationship? Or like, hey, did you know that they, even though they live together and are in love, they sleep in separate bedrooms because they sleep better that way? And then it's like, hey, did you know actually that like Sam and Katie have a phantom thread situation where he just gets a little too wrapped up in his work and she feeds him arsenic poison. Yeah. And you're like, hey, you know what? Like, little weird for me, but it works for them. So I'm not going to judge it.
Yeah.
Now, I guess just kind of wrapping all this up. I mean, Casey, do you have, final thoughts on what you indicated a little bit about what you don't like in a soundtrack, but Radiohead in film, including Jonny Greenwood as a composer for scores, is there kind of a nutshell take that you have on it? It's okay if you don't, but about like what you like about it, what you don't like about it, maybe. Or...
I mean, I think it's only all positive. The only possible negative would be if Jonny became so in demand as a composer that he couldn't do records anymore or something. But other than that, I think it's a really great like expansion of the sort of possibilities that exist, them composing these albums and now for his music to have a chance to expand into cinema and to be kind of composed specifically for the screen rather than just, Radiohead needle drops and Cameron Crowe movies. Like it can be, it just, and I feel like really like with A Moon-Shaped Pool, and I guess I haven't done an episode on that yet, but that record I feel like is really reaping the benefits of Jonny having gone in this other direction, and then to bring all of that back into the band and to really expand their sound and their palette and to just refine things and it just allow them to move in sonic directions, sort of like they expanded their palette with Kid A by bringing on all the electronics. Now they're kind of bringing in all the orchestral stuff, and I mean I just love that they're able to mix all of that together and create work that feels vital and new, and it's not it doesn't have the sort of fatigue that can set in for a lot of bands when they get that many albums down the line and things are stagnating. I feel like they're really growing and blossoming out, and I kind of feel like, I mean, even like with regard to The Smile, if that's what they need to do to get to a point where they feel like vibrant and inspired, and now they can bring all that energy back into a new Radiohead record, then I'm all for it. So it's one of the, I mean, it's cool to have been a fan of them for a long time, and then to be so into film, and then to kind of see, the two streams crossing, and like one of my favorite musicians working with one of my favorite filmmakers, and the results being so much, I mean, so immediately great, unquestionably so. I don't know. I only have positive thoughts really on the whole thing.
Well, I love that you have some measure of optimism about there being more Radiohead music in the future. I share that. Zach is coming from a more self-protective and defensive position where he's more sure that they're done, but not to speak for
not
you,
so
Zach,
much lately, but yes, overall that is correct.
There was that story the other day, right, where Phil said they're going to get together, but I mean, they're probably just...
Our mother texted us the article.
I me personally, I don't expect anything. I don't expect like the next LP to come out of that, but I mean, it at least tells us that I don't know,
they could tour.
Yeah, I would take that.
Well, I think what Casey, you encapsulated all that like so brilliantly, but I think one of the things that stood out to me is like what you said on The Smile, and I know you said that like maybe that album hasn't grabbed you, and maybe it might not ever, but I've been thinking about that since we saw them live. That reinvention is often quite jarring, and I know that a lot of people felt that way when Kid A was released, and then within a year's time, it had kind of, generally speaking, a lot of folks had come around to this sort of new style. And I've been thinking, having seen The Smile live, and even though I listened to that album a lot, the way those songs opened up and the new material they played, we're going to do an episode on that. So, but I was just thinking, like, man, for these guys in the twilight of their 40s, for me to go to a Radiohead adjacent show and only want to hear new material, that is so genius, like. If I go to a U2 concert, for instance, or something like that, like I want to hear Sunday Bloody Sunday and whatever, and that would be the case.
Get on your boots.
Yeah, get on your boots. Right. Exactly. That would be the case though. If I saw Radiohead at this point, is I want to hear Paranoid Android and,
yeah.
But so I think it's just so brilliant. It is a little jarring and maybe it's not as good, but I think that's one of the things they've done just so amazingly well. And then the other thing you said too about like the two things converging, like just even listening to that One Moment of Phantom Thread score, I was hearing like a lot of the beauty and optimism of A Moon-Shaped Pool, albeit kind of shrouded in melancholy. And I just think that I'm really excited to re-listen to that album again, with kind of that in mind. And yeah, I just think the way you said that was so excellent. And I don't know if you have any other closing thoughts. I wanted to say one other thing, but please go ahead if you do.
Well, this is kind of a side point, but what you were saying about, with Radiohead, like we're still in contemporary Radiohead time. So like when they release a new album, we're experiencing it as it's coming out. And like my music listening, especially for the past couple of years, has, I think like you were saying, Zach, like it's been mostly backward looking. I've been going back into older stuff, and I've just been like obsessed with Bob Dylan. And and really going through like the whole catalog, not just sticking to the 60s or 70s or whatever, but like the Christian period and the 90s and the everything from the 2000 on. And it does strike me that like me coming to it this late in the game and having the benefit of being able to hop around like 60 years of him as a recording artist, and to like maybe listen to like Saved and be like, I'm not really feeling that today, but I can at least jump over to like Infidels or something, and just kind of like keep going that way. It like, we don't have that luxury with Radiohead at the moment and The Smile, but like if it were me 20 years in the future and I was able to just like listen to The Smile and not bring that weight to it of being like, this is what we're getting instead of, but just appreciating it on its own terms, that can completely open something up. And I hope to very soon get to that point. It's mostly just a matter of, I haven't had a lot of, I don't know if that's even true. I was going to say I haven't had a lot of time to listen to it, but honestly, I've just been stuck on Dylan. So maybe it's just at that point, it's not quite resonating me quite as strongly as it will in the future. But I do.
I think you're in for a treat when you have the space to get into it.
I did like in preparation for being on today, like I did return to, oddly enough, Hail to the Thief, because I listened to you guys' Hail to the Thief episode. And nice. So I gave that another listen through, and I've been just listening to random Radiohead songs here and there. So it's got me back in the groove a little bit. So I'll give The Smile another go and see what I make of it.
Hey, we'll take it. We don't want to just get new fans for Radiohead. We want to get old Radiohead fans back into Radiohead. Yeah.
I think what you just said is kind of like the way I feel about The Eraser. Like I obviously was not a journalist then, and wasn't reviewing it. But I think what I have the benefit of is the hindsight of like that In Rainbows came after it, and I am able to look at it as like the separate statement from an artist, but also I can really see how it's has some leftovers of Hail to the Thief and was this wonderful bridge. It's just my opinion. And I know a lot of music journalists were like, it's good, but it's watered down Radiohead. Well, I don't feel that way now because I can sort of look at it in hindsight. And it's just, I don't know if this has been your journey with Dylan, but Dylan for me was kind of a later in life discovery. And it is so amazing. I think that album in 1996 or 7, that was sort of his comeback. That
Time Out of Mind, yeah.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. That is so cool to listen to, like in context, because it is a great album, but it's sort of this wonderful return to form. So I think like we do have a certain luxury nowadays, even though we kind of opened the episode talking about like a lot of the tactile things that are missing in today's movies, or I think you could apply that to music as well. But I do think that we are obviously the beneficiaries of like a lot of that convenience and technology too. So thank you, world, for that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. But, there's been there's no better time to have been like a Dylan fan, especially just because of the bootleg series and all the stuff that's available now that wasn't necessarily available if you were a fan in the 60s or going back like that. They're doing like a Time Out of Mind expanded edition later this month. So you'll be able to hear alternate versions of all those tracks and stuff that didn't make it. And I mean, that I will say, like, now being into this heavy Dylan thing, like I used to measure every band by Radiohead. Now I kind of measure everybody by Dylan, and that's a very hard standard for anybody to live up to. But especially in terms of the way that he will play a song different from year to year. He'll just completely rearrange something. He'll rewrite lyrics. Even from like night to night on the same tour, it might be played in a different key. It might even be played in a different time signature.
Right.
And I'm at this point in my life, in my music listening life or whatever, that's what's super compelling to me. And I'm kind of like, I've been thinking back, like, are there instances of Radiohead like reinventing songs live? And I know they have on a number of occasions, where, especially with like some of the electronic stuff, adapting that back into more of a live band approach and so on.
My favorite in a way live performance of is the song "I Might Be Wrong," and I love both of those. And I apologize, I did interrupt you, but yeah,
no. So I'm asking myself, are there things like in their live catalog history that I need to go back and revisit and kind of appreciate on that level? Because for a long time, if I go to a concert, I kind of want to hear the song that I know. And that's a complaint that people often have about Dylan. It's like, I couldn't even tell who he was playing, or, he's mumbling or he's shouting or whatever. But now I'm in this other mode. It's more, I don't know, almost like a jam band mode or something, Grateful Dead sort of territory, where it's like, man, they played it different that night than they did this night. And the guitar solo that night was totally different than this other night, and things like that. So, and I've heard that they're honestly pushing more in that direction with the Smile a little bit, that they are jamming on stage a little bit, that it has this like life to it that is not just like trying to recreate the records and so on. So
they're a guitar band.
Check it out. Yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. I mean, I during their encore, it was a new song. And I mean, to be that close and to just see the way Jonny in particular, like, touches the guitar and interacts with it, I was slack jawed, and not for like comedic effect, but for like 5 minutes straight.
Wow.
And I just would encourage that. I mean, it doesn't have to, like, I don't think people have to like the Smile, but I think that, like Radiohead, you have to work at it, to kind of get the melodies in your mind and find it. But I think it's really rewarding, once you do.
It's cool. It's like there's a record out there that I know it's going to probably hit heavy for me. I just need to like put in the time and check it out. Yeah.
You should really blow your mind and watch Licorice Pizza and listen to the Smile LP, straight through on the same day.
Pink Floyd, Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Sync them up.
I'd just like to kind of just quickly close, like, on a personal anecdote. I gestured at this when we were opening, that the Casey on Kubrick and also the Jonathan Glazer couple films you covered, Birth and Under the Skin, are two, like, really, really, I don't know if they're my top 10 or anything, but really, really great movies. And friend of mine in life and friend of the show, Keith Bratton, is the person who initially showed me 2001: A Space Odyssey back in 2014. So, like I said, I was familiar, but that series you did was just really, really eye-opening to me, and really, like, I don't only watch Kubrick movies now, but I do watch movies with like a greater sense of interest and appreciation, and really, like, thanks in large part to that. So I just wanted to let you know, like, what a difference that made. I have like my Stanley Kubrick.
I see it. Yeah. It's so cool.
I have the Vincent LaBruno biography, and then a book about Eyes Wide Shut and Clockwork Orange. And I haven't read Luck of Barry Lyndon yet. That's next. But all that to say, it's been something that has been, like, really, really, I hope, like, deep in my artistic appreciation. And I feel like Radiohead and Kubrick are similar in that, like, they are distinctly male, even though it's men exploring these really challenging concepts that we should wrestle with, but I just want to let you know, like, what a difference those discussions made in my life and my appreciation for a great artist, and then not just contained to that. So I really, 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 really appreciate that, and it was just such a joy to chat with you.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. Man. That's like the best possible thing you could hear when you do a podcast, is that somebody out there really, really, appreciated it and got into it.
Yeah, and, big time.
I mean, in preparation for doing the show, I kind of wanted to get an idea of the vibe of the show and everything. So I just started going back through episodes, and if I had more free time, I probably would have gone through the whole catalog. I mean, I will eventually get through the whole thing, but I think I've heard maybe 3 or 4 episodes at this point. I love what you guys are doing, and it's kind it's getting me back into Radiohead, not a new fan, but pulling back an old one. So there's that. Awesome. And I love what this medium allows us to kind of revisit things and go deeper than the first time. And especially with a band like Radiohead, like that I was my deepest level of engagement was some years ago, and to now kind of be coming back into it a little bit. And it's just awesome. So thanks again for reaching out, for having me on today. And it's been a blast. I mean, I want to do a million more podcasts now. So yeah, you've got me kind of, you've got the juices flowing. You got me inspired. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing just such a detailed knowledge and love of kind of the topic at hand to what we were talking about. And honestly, if this had been just up to me, I think this episode might have been us only talking about the use of 15-step in Twilight. So I really appreciate you kind of smartening up the affair a little bit,
Happy
Casey.
Yeah.
And Casey, is there anything that you want to plug or tell people where to find you?
I'm sort of I'm a little bit invisible from a social media presence perspective. You can follow me on my Instagram. It's OEDIPAX. I haven't posted anything in there like a year, so I need to be active again. I post mostly photography on there. I don't really do like daily updates or anything, but
sure.
Yeah, you can follow me there. I have a locked Twitter account. I don't plan to unlock it.
Okay.
But I guess you could request to follow me, and maybe I'll let you in. I don't really post there that much, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I know that you mentioned your upcoming podcast. That sounds incredibly interesting. I will be a listener of that.
Yes. So the podcast is called Svetlana, and each Svetlana has an exclamation point after it. It is the brainchild of Dan Katroser, who is a playwright, screenwriter, and he's been obsessed with this story for, I think, the better part of a decade, if not more.
Wow.
But very briefly, it's the story of Svetlana Alexeyeva, who is Joseph Stalin's one and only daughter. And during her childhood and during Joseph Stalin's reign, she was kind of like the symbol of, youth and innocence in Soviet Russia. And after Stalin died, she ended up defecting to the United States in the early 60s. And so the podcast, believe it or not, with everything that happened in her life that was crazy up until the age of 40 when she defected to the United States, it even got crazier after she came to the United States and became involved in this kind of weird Frank Lloyd Wright society / cult thing. And for more, you just have to listen in. So the first episode, I believe, will be out like January the 30th, something like that. So check it out where fine podcasts are available.
Thank you so much for setting the time aside. Thank you for all the stuff you brought to the table for us to talk about. And just thanks so much for doing the show. It's been really wonderful chatting with you.
Pleasure to be on. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Casey.
And on that note, listeners, thank you as well. We will see you next week on a Friday. I've been your host, Walker Glenn.
I've been Zach Glenn.
Talk to you soon, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to